Hi, I'm at the Flame University in Pune and attending the Law, Economics and Policy conference. I'm in conversation with Nitin Pai, the co-founder and the director at Takshashila Institution. Thank you so much, Nitin, for taking the time. A lot of interesting conversations through the day, but I thought your panel was particularly interesting, and you were talking about laws as they relate to tech companies, big tech companies. And this, I think, is a conversation that's happening globally, right? But here in India, do you think that we need to stand in isolation and rather than depending on laws that are formulated in other geographies and craft laws that govern these big tech companies that relate to us particularly? Can we stand in isolation?
Yeah, see, first of all, I think all of the world is dealing with this issue of how to govern information age companies, because most of the world still has industrial age legal and political frameworks. So it's not a challenge that's unique to us. It's a challenge which all the world has, including the advanced economies, and we are no different. To your question of can we do it alone, the answer is obviously not, because by its very nature, the information economy is global. Right? The supply chains are global. The companies are in one place, the employees are in another place, the data is stored in another place, and data needs to be in many places for it to make sense and derive value. So it is an interconnected world, and therefore the regulatory framework has to interoperate. We could have our own interesting domestic nuances. We should protect our interests. There are things which are in the Indian constitution that need to be protected, which goes without saying. But this can be done within an overall framework where we are in constant touch and engagement with our most important economic partners. The Quad, for example, is an interesting framework, because the Quad is a framework where the countries share interests, values and complementarities in terms of economics. So at the beginning, I think I would start with the Quad, harmonize technology policy within the Quad. That will be enough for a start, and then we can expand it to other like-minded countries which can come on board.
So, my struggle with this is understanding where you start, because it's a problem I think that we're facing on an ongoing basis. Every day we come up with one new aspect that needs to be governed that isn't right now. You've studied this a lot more. Where do we start?
No, actually, the problem that we see that every day there's a new thing, it's because we are looking at the manifestations of a very complex phenomenon. In reality, it's not that hard, right? Because what you're essentially doing is you're trying to see how do you govern big companies in consonance with your constitutional values. Now, constitutional values and constitutions, I mean, it's quite obvious what they are, right? You just have to have fidelity towards the constitution. For example, the right to privacy is determined by our constitution. You don't have to, worry about where to start. You need to have a right to privacy. That's a good place to start. So most places, when it comes to the most basic constitutional values, there's a good places to start. And the good news is that wherever you start, you might have 4 or 5 different starting points. Wherever you start, it still works, because it addresses the underlying values address the manifestations.
So then to put your 2 points together, there needs to be some kind of dialogue that is happening, say, within these blocks. But the challenge is, again, jurisdiction, in that some companies, big tech companies, may not have their primary office in that particular jurisdiction. So then do you still have the ability to govern them?
Yeah, see, I think let's go back, right? This is not a new problem, right? Very few people know that the International Telecommunications Union is older than the United Nations. Right. The countries of the world were agreeing on how to govern telecom companies and telecoms as a service a full 80 years before the United Nations was formed, right? So it's not that tech governance is new. It's not that countries are doing this for the first time. There are models, and it's a combination of listening and understanding the underlying technology and how it works, and for the bureaucracy to harmonize that with the national interest. I understand these are problems, right? Because sometimes you can't harmonize the national interest as easily with technology, because technology is pushing you in a different direction. And sometimes technology needs you to make certain compromises with what you think is a national interest. But this is a dynamic process. And that's why I said it's best if we do this in concert with our partners, because whatever comes out will be interoperable from day one, as opposed to each country doing its own stuff and then figuring out that, you have problems harmonizing.
How important, and this is my last question, is it that the stakeholders, the end consumer, because to put this in context, a lot of the people that I have spoken to say, "So what? I know that I click accept to say that my data is shared." How important is it for those stakeholders to care about the fact that their privacy might just be breached?
See, I think a lot of people don't think too much about it because they are not aware of the immediate harm that can happen. And I agree that harm might not happen to most people. I hope that it doesn't happen to most people. The reason to be cautious is you can't predict what kind of turn the industry would take. You might have thought that your data in Twitter is safe because it's in a private limited company listed on NASDAQ, and suddenly you have one billionaire who takes this company over and decides whatever he wants to do. Right? Literally, his word is the law. Right? He could decide to sell your data tomorrow. So I think it's very important to be careful because you can't predict the future. And once, you don't want to do things which are irreversible. Right? Once you put your data there, it's irreversible. So you have to be very careful upfront rather than regret it later.
So a lot to think about, and certainly something for you to comment about as well. Let us know what you think in the comment section below, and stay tuned to BQ Prime.